foto's, Microsoft Photos. Okay, good morning everybody. Those coming in later, they're not getting it. The program is packed, we have no time to lose. Good morning. Scratch is my presentation software of choice. I have and I have here a presentation I normally use in slow speed, but I will speed it up because I only need the last slide. Every 6 seconds there will be a new slide. It's just imagery, and remember the last one is important. Let's do it full screen. There we go. 2 practical issues to start with. In case you need help during this conference, next 3 days, people using 2 badges, the orange ones, are there to help you. The other practical thing is that we are we are happy with Citilab hosting us. It's a great building, it's a great place. We feel here like home, and you should too. We will take over the building the next few days. But please be aware that also in Citilab some other companies are having their place. Okay, I need a paper more than I thought. My name is Joek van Montfort. I'm the lead organizer of this conference. Saturday after lunch I'll take the mic to thank some people. Now I'm just here to open it. Hello everybody, welcome to the first Scratch conference in Europe. Thank you for the applause. Actually, you're making the applause for yourself because it's your conference. Almost half of you here are participating with a workshop or a presentation or a demo. And with your fee, travel expenses and much more, you are paying almost all costs. There's no big company or institution supporting us, so it's just us. It's our conference. It's also my conference. The conference at MIT last year was such a warm experience, I just had to bring it to Europe. And one person I will thank right now, it was Frank who made me do it. Frank Sabate from Barcelona. But it was not only Frank. The presentation is already in the last slide. It was not only Frank, because with the help of many, many people, we succeeded, and here we are, connecting worlds with Scratch. And the photo behind me is from mid-60s. It's there because Mitchel Resnick, last year at MIT, in one of his talks, said, Scratch, or my work, is about bringing the sandbox to school, and not school to the sandbox. Well, school to the sandbox, other people try. He is the counter-revolution. We try to bring sandbox to school. And a lot of people nowadays claim the importance of imagination when it comes to learning, and for sure all in the Scratch community, but we go further by working damned hard to find out what it is, imagination for learning, how it works, and how all can enjoy the benefits, independent of business models and short moments of fame. The conference is opened. Thank you for your attention, and I'll make room for our first 2 keynote speakers, Mitchel Resnick, Brennan. Thank you.
So it's really, we're so appreciative of everything that they've done. So it's great to be here in Barcelona. Both Karen and I arrived yesterday, and it's exciting to be here in Barcelona, but even more exciting to be here with the Scratch community. Karen was just saying it feels a little bit like a family reunion, and it's great to see some of the longtime family members, but also to meet some new relatives that we haven't met yet. So we look forward over the next few days to getting a chance to know all of you and to learn more about the things that you're doing. And it's great to have it here in Europe. I was saying to Karen when we saw the Scratch project up there. It was great to start off a Scratch conference with a Scratch project where the blocks weren't in English. So it was great, again, it gave us a feeling of being here in Europe. And as we were thinking about it and reflecting, we were thinking about when that idea of a Scratch conference in Barcelona first came up. And so we were talking about that.
So we got a little taste of that from you about blaming or praising Frank as instigator. And we really loved the Scratch conferences at MIT. The first one was in 2008. We hosted another one in 2010, another one in 2012. And so last summer, we were hosting the event, and we had a large whiteboard space, which we used as a message board where people could share information about where they were from, ideas for sessions, and just provocations and suggestions. And one stood out in particular to us and clearly to people at the conference itself. Scratch conferences are usually in the even years. Europe would love to host conference in odd years. Or how about 2013 Barcelona? So from this very humble beginning with just a scribble on a whiteboard, we are here today. So I think there has not been enough applause and cheering for the organizers of this conference. So I think we should have another round of applause for the organizers.
Because I think, as Karen mentioned, there have been Scratch conferences in Boston in 2008 and 2010, 2012, and we know all of the work that goes into it. I think Karen knows especially well because she's taken the lead role in putting those together. So we just know how much work it is, and but we're so appreciative of all the efforts that have been put on, and we're so happy to be here to be able to share in the experience with all of you. Because it's something we've really been looking forward to. Actually, since last year. Actually, we didn't actually officially introduce ourselves at the beginning. I think most people know I'm at the MIT Media Lab leading the Scratch team. Karen actually had to change since last year. So last year, for those at the conference, she'd been a longtime member of our lifelong kindergarten group at the MIT Media Lab. But in the past year,
I'm now an assistant professor of education at Harvard University. So I'm just down the street. I very much miss the Media Lab, but very happy to be nearby.
But luckily, as she shifted out to Harvard, has held on to her Scratch activities and has been actively involved, continuing to work with Scratch Ed and other projects. So we're both so happy to be here. As we started talking about how what type of things we want to share during this session, how we want to use this time, we were so appreciative of having this opportunity to spend the first hour of the conference with you. As we thought about it, we thought it'd be nice. Actually, last year at the kickoff of the conference, it was the 5th anniversary of Scratch. So we looked back and reflected on the first 5 years of Scratch after it was launched in 2007. And this year, as we started thinking about it, we thought it'd be nice to sort of look forward and to think about some of the hopes and dreams for Scratch as we look ahead for the years to come. And as we started thinking about the hopes and dreams and also some of the challenges that lie ahead of us, and we started looking for different frameworks for putting it together, we happened upon a framework which is sometimes used in the business world, which actually is not necessarily where Karen and I come from, and so it's not necessarily our normal form of analysis, but we thought it might be interesting for this project to use this analysis, which is called a SWOT analysis, which stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So as I said, this is not our normal everyday analysis that we do in our work at MIT and Harvard, but we thought this might be an interesting way for us to start thinking about as we look ahead for Scratch and the different efforts around Scratch, how we might think about it in these terms. So we're going to organize this session this morning with us sharing some of our reflections in thinking about, as we look ahead, what do we see as some of the strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats as we look ahead in the Scratch community. But then we also want to reach out to you. So later on in this session, we're going to be asking you to be thinking about what you see as some of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So keep that in your mind. It was really asking you to write down things, to share them later so we can open it up to discussion. To think about it during the rest of the session, but also through the rest of the conference to be able to be thinking about those things.
Yeah, we really see this opening hour as sort of an extended conversation that's going to be seeded by a conversation between Mitch and I, but then really opening it up to the whole group.
and conversation. One thing, Karen and I have done a number of these together in addition to webinars, and we're always working on trying to make it more conversational, because we really didn't want to make this. It was great that we had this opportunity to spend this hour, but we did not want to spend the hour with me doing a half-hour presentation and Karen doing a half-hour presentation. So our hope is to have first some conversation between us and then conversation with you. So we're working our best to be conversational, although sometimes I fall into presentation mode and start, because I get excited about ideas and want to keep spewing them out, but hopefully we can keep this a conversation. So maybe we'll start with thinking about what we see as some of the strengths in looking ahead. And I think for me, one of the things that has been most important about Scratch, both over the first 6 years and as we look to the future, is that although in some ways when some people talk about Scratch, they talk about it as a programming language. But for me, and again, it's natural to think of it as a programming language and think about programs in Scratch. And there's a lot to be said about the ways in which Scratch has some advantages as a programming language and the graphical nature and eliminating the syntax of other programming languages. And those are all important things. And I think it have contributed to why we're excited about Scratch and to some of its success in the world. But when we think of the strengths of Scratch, to us what comes to mind is the fact that it's not just a programming language. As important as some of those things are, it's just the beginning. And I think to us what's most important about Scratch is that it's not just a programming language, but it's really embedded in certain ways of thinking about learning and a certain approach to learning. So we haven't worked out exactly where the transitions are going to be. So I think as we talk about I think there are lots of different ways that we think about the approach to learning. That obviously some of this builds on. We have a long tradition of building on the constructionist approach of Seymour Papert to talk about the importance of learning through creating things. And of course, in Scratch, you're creating things. But it goes beyond that. I mean, like one part that's really important to us that it's not just about creating, but also about sharing your creations with others. And this idea that you're part of a community, that sharing is an important part. And in fact, that from the very beginning that we launched the Scratch sharing website, community website, the exact same time that we launched the programming language, was part of our commitment to that. And it's been so exciting for us. And for us, one of the most important parts about Scratch is that there's this community around it. And now more than 3 million projects, and every day, I think it's 4,000 new projects every day coming to the website. So it's a way that all of us can see all the exciting things happening, and an opportunity for people to build on each other's work, learn from one another's work, get feedback on their work. And of course, it's not just the community of people creating with Scratch, but also the community of educators and others around Scratch.
Yeah, the Scratch Ed online community was launched in 2009, and there are more than 9,000 educators who are participating in that. And educators in formal settings like K-12 classrooms, but also museum educators, library educators, parents working with kids at home, after-school clubs. So it's been really exciting to see that sort of flourish over the past N years. I think I was really interested in your use of the word constructionism, because I feel like that's a word we sometimes shy away from saying explicitly. And so I wonder if we could just do a show of hands of how many people think about constructionism as the theory of learning underlying Scratch. Okay, sort of that's what I would expect. And so how do we, what are people here thinking about when they're thinking about a theory of learning? What are the important guiding principles underlying their approach, like you were talking about, learning through making? And obviously, we value personalization and diversity in creation.
Yeah, so again, I think when we talk about it, there is about learning through creating. We talk about learning through as part of a community, sharing and collaborating. But a special way that we want to be able to have people have all different entry paths into that community. So I think another aspect of this is that diversity of entry paths. Actually, a metaphor that we sometimes use that builds on, again, a metaphor I first heard from Seymour Papert, where he talked about the importance of a low floor and a high ceiling, meaning that it should be easy to get started, but you could do more and more complex things. And we now talk about wide walls, meaning there should be many different ways to get engaged. So it's not enough to have just one way of going from easy beginning to more and more complex things, but to support a wide diversity of different types of projects. And I think that's important because we know that people in the world have a wide diversity of different types of interests. and passions. And we really know that the best learning happens when people are working on things that they care deeply about. So we want to make sure to support all different types of people, and that's one of the reasons why with Scratch we want to support a wide diversity of different types of projects. So we didn't want it to just be supporting games or just supporting simulations, but to support a wide range of different types of projects and approaches for doing those projects. So that diversity has been one of the real strengths I see of Scratch, of the ability of everyone to personalize things, to match their own passions and interests.
Yeah, I constituted this slide. These are thumbnails from featured projects, recent featured projects on the Scratch Online community. And it really reflects that type of diversity of creation that you were just talking about. So we've got a few simulations, we've got a tutorial, which we love so much, we've got games, we've got stories, we've got number puzzles, and I think it's really interesting to see the ways in which you were talking about creating and connecting, how the community has supported this diversity as well, because it doesn't just happen on its own.
Yeah. And I think that's probably been one of the most exciting things for us, is to see that diversity emerging, because one thing that's nice is when you develop an environment like this, we'd planned it for diversity and we had an idea of the different types of things, but the community has made it much more diverse than we ever imagined in creating types of projects that we had never thought about. So it's so exciting for us to see all of that happening. We think that's really what makes it such a rich environment, to people creating those projects, but also supporting one another in those types of efforts. So I think for us, when we think about those strengths, it really is those different, building upon it, an approach to learning that supports and values learning by creating, learning as part of a community, providing multiple pathways so that many different people, each in their own style, can become engaged and do things that are connected to their interests and passions. So those are strengths, and I think for us looking ahead, I think that's one of the challenges we continue to think about, whether it's kind of with next generations of Scratch or Scratch Ed or workshops we create, whether it's from the software, from support materials or workshops. We're always thinking to build on those strengths in the future. Those are things that are important for us. So next, of course, although we see lots of strengths, there are also some weaknesses. Yeah, and I should say, in thinking about this, when we talked about this framework of strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats, the people who developed it, they thought about the strengths and weaknesses are things that come from inside, that the things that you're working on internally can have things that you're bringing to a strength and things that are still lacking and challenges. And then the opportunities and threats are more things that come externally and things that have to be responding to, reacting to, adjusting to, building on top of. They're coming from outside. So we saw the strengths and what we see is coming from within the Scratch community, but there are also some challenges and weaknesses.
When we were talking a bit about how we would discuss each section, I volunteered to address the weaknesses and threats.
Yeah. So I get to say the rosy side, so I can be the optimistic, smiley Mitch, and Karen can.
He's half full, I'm half empty. So, no, I think that because I'm so passionate, as so many people in this room are, about all of the ways in which, about Scratch's strengths and its opportunities. But I think you always need to keep an eye on the weaknesses, and it's something I think, having been a member of the Scratch team for half a decade, have an appreciation for how hard the team works at trying to address some of these weaknesses. So I think we wanted to take this as an opportunity to surface some of the things that we wrestle with or acknowledge internally as being challenging, interesting, full of interestingness, but work to be done. So I think as we were preparing for this, I was trying to think, how do you talk about the weaknesses? And one of the major weaknesses for me, and it's something I'm preoccupied, is how much support do you need to give people to enable them to be successful in terms of what they want to pursue, what they're passionate about, what they want to be creating? Because as you mentioned earlier, and as we saw on the slide, there's just this enormous diversity of creation. And how do you support all of that diversity?
In fact, your PhD dissertation touched very centrally on these issues of how you balance with the sort of structure and agency, how you want to give people a lot of openness to allow them explore things they're passionate about, but also the support to help them succeed.
Yeah. So even just looking internally at the Scratch authoring environment as a particular case, I mean, what I love about this when we host workshops is that moment where people open up the authoring environment and there's this enormous sense of possibility, but this kind of initial panic of where do I start, what should I be doing? And so I think a weakness that I would highlight almost, but it's right on the edge for me of the strength and the weakness, is the open-endedness, that there isn't as much structure as we've seen with, part of this is looking at Scratch in relation to other tools that are out in the wild and out in the world. And there are some that are much more prescriptive, that you open up the tool, you have the step-by-step tutorial that you walk through, you've got the end things you can create, and there's something very powerful about, in very short order, having a sophisticated project. And this is a slightly different angle.
Yeah, and clearly we know for some people out there, there's other paths, there's an easier path for getting started if they're sort of told what to do step for step. But we then also worry that where's that going to lead to, and whether it's going to lead to the type of learning experience that we are hoping to support.
So as a weakness, I think there is this question of how do you support the multiplicity of pathways that we want to see out in the world? And there are resources, as you mentioned some of them already. I know people here are probably familiar with the Scratch cards, which are one of my favorite resources, which were developed by Natalie Rusk at the Media Lab. And I think that's a nice way of getting started, but there's so many more resources that could be developed, and there are things that we're doing at Harvard. But one challenge of developing all the resources that we would love to develop is that the MIT Scratch team is small, Harvard Scratch Ed team is small. Community and the types of new initiatives and new features that people are interested in.
Yeah, but I think that challenge of how from a relatively small group we can continue to scale and reach a larger audience. And obviously part of the answer is by connecting with all of you and connecting with the larger community around the world, but trying to think about how we can sort of keep up with, we get so many different suggestions and from people around the world. So in some ways the large community is great of supporting getting it out, and on the Scratch Ed website, it's been great seeing all the different materials that educators around the world are contributing to help one another. But just as quickly as the community is providing support materials, they're also providing new suggestions of directions they wish Scratch were going. So we're always thinking about that and trying to do with the team we have. We have actually several members of the Scratch team here. I know John Maloney is here, and Champika Fernando and Shaimindu Dashgupta. So we have, so they're here at the conference. Hope you get a chance to meet them. But there's between MIT and Harvard, there's a dozen or 15 of us, and trying to see all the different ways to go. And we're doing our best to try to do it. But I know some of the things we've heard a lot from that we know is important as Scratch continues to grow, that we're working on now, just to fill you in. I know a lot of people, we've been excited by the response to Scratch 2.0, the online version, and the fact that you can now author in the web browser, and it's opened up new types of projects and new types of collaboration. Although we've heard from a lot of people, and probably some of you, about the need for a standalone version, and we're working on that, and that will be out by the end of the summer. We also know, although in doing the online version, we put a lot of effort into the web-based version, but by the way we did the web-based version, especially that it's in Flash, it doesn't work on most tablets. So that's another thing we're working on for the future is making tablet version of Scratch. But we're trying to see where to prioritize our efforts. But that's certainly one. I know also for educators, there's been a lot of talk about educators wanting better ways of managing Scratch in their classrooms.
Yeah, I think, there's so much potential and possibility for learning with the online community, but particularly in classroom settings and school settings where there's a somewhat conservative approach at times towards network learning. There's the question of how do I know what my students are doing, what's participating, oh, thank you. How do I keep track and support the learning in the best way possible? And sort of the wilds of the Scratch online community are sometimes challenging. So we're really excited to be adding features to support educators, adding classrooms of kids, and facilitating the interactions among those students. So that's also a later this summer feature.
Maybe one other thing that I'd mention, again, we hear from lots of people about what they wish for is greater connections to the physical world. And I know there are a bunch of people here who have been doing great work in that area. And so we look forward to the conference, seeing some of the things that you've been doing in connecting to the Scratch, to whether it's Microsoft Connect or the sensor devices. There's just a lot of great work that's going on around the world. And with Scratch, we've had a few things that we've supported directly, like the Lego We Do Robotics and the Scratch board. And one thing we're working on now is to have a more open approach to supporting physical devices. So one thing that we will hope to have out later this year is a more standard way for other people to add specialized blocks for controlling particular external devices. So that's something that we're working on. I think will be another way of extending Scratch and opening it up to have the community play a stronger role in that. So I know but John Maloney and Shai Mindu who are here are working on that. So those are two people you might talk to about that. But that's something we hope to add out later, not just for us to support more external devices, but for us to be a framework that will help the whole community be able to add on some more specialized ways of connecting to both online devices, but also different types of web services as well, things online. So those are things to be coming that hopefully we'll be able to continue to help Scratch grow and to meet the widely diverse needs and interests. So maybe on to the opportunities. So as I mentioned, so the next two categories, opportunities or threats, are more how we think about other things going on in the world and how we can respond and adjust and take advantage of things that are happening elsewhere in the world. And one thing that, as we thought about this and thinking about other trends in the world that might have impacts on Scratch, one thing in the past year that's really been that we've been very aware of, and probably a lot of you are as well, that there's been a growing cultural excitement about the possibilities of coding and the importance of coding. And that's represented by new websites like code.org. Actually, I'm curious, how many of you have heard about code.org? So you can see, so really they've gotten the word out, probably more than half of the people. So this was a website that was started to highlight the importance and the value of learning to code. And there's a video that highlights some well-known celebrities, both from the high-tech world and from the sports world and from the music world, talking about why coding is so important. And we see this from other sources as well. It's not just this one website. Last year on New Year's Day, the mayor of New York City said his New Year's resolution was to learn how to code. And their whole countries, the country of Estonia, said that all first graders should learn to code. And there's active debate, as some of you are certainly well aware and know more than I do, in the United Kingdom about the new strategies for changing the way computing and IT is dealt with in schools, supporting, and that coding is an important part of that discussion. So there's lots of discussion out there about the value of coding. So that's an opportunity of seeing how Scratch can be part of that. So we were happy that with code.org, Scratch was one of 4 approaches to coding that they could highlight on their website. So I think as more and more people are talking about and recognizing the value of coding, the importance of coding, it opens up an opportunity because more people are interested in hearing about this and are open to some of the things that we've been talking about in the Scratch community. So I think that this is something that I think as we look ahead, it's something that it opens up possibilities for partnerships. That it's not something that Scratch is alone in the world trying to push a certain way of thinking. But I think there's real opportunities for partnerships as other people around the world are looking at the value of coding, that we can contribute not just by putting Scratch out there, but also with our voices about how, bringing the ideas underlying Scratch to that larger worldwide conversation that is emerging around coding.
Yeah, and as there's an increasing community of developers designing tools and experiences for kids who are interested in computational creation, that opens up further opportunities in terms of supporting pathways, which we were talking about earlier. Because I don't think that there's any expectation that Scratch is the beginning and the end of an experience, that it's part of a larger set of experiences. And it's nice that there are, in terms of not just pathways within Scratch, but opportunities for pathways beyond Scratch as well.
Yeah. But that idea that this opportunity to not just share Scratch, but to share the vision and the ideas around Scratch, the things we were talking about under the strengths category, ideas about the importance of sharing and collaborating, the importance of diversity and multiple pathways, all of those core ideas underlying Scratch, it provides us a possibility of sharing those things and importance of sharing those things. But I think this also connects maybe to the next category of threats. Because I think, although there's an opportunity to spread these ideas, there might be other voices out there. Maybe this connects with some of the threats that we see looking around.
Yeah, I think one thing that's been really interesting, even exploring the code.org website, there's this strong conversation about workforce, which is something that we talk a lot about. And I think we even talked about this at the opening keynote last year. But why are we doing this? Why do we want to be doing this? And something that I know you care a lot about is this idea of computation as an expressive medium, computation for personal expression.
And just to be clear, we have nothing against developing workforce. I think it's great if people start with Scratch and use that as a pathway for job possibilities. And it's great that it does provide a pathway towards jobs and careers, and we think that's great. We don't want that to be the only pathway. And as you were saying, I think one thing that to us, what motivates us especially, is the idea that for everyone, it's important to be able to have ways of expressing themselves, regardless of whether they're going to end up using this in their job or not. And we often use the analogy with writing that very, very few people grow up to become professional writers, journalists or novelists. But it's important for everyone to learn to write, because it's a way to share your ideas with others. And we see coding the exact same way, that it's not just about getting a job, although that is one pathway for some people, but most people aren't going to become professional programmers, professional coders. But we still think that just like everyone should learn to write, we think everyone should learn to code as a way of sharing their voice, of being able to express themselves, whether it's making an interactive birthday card to send to a friend, or to make a public service announcement about a community issue. I think these are things that we see as so important, and that it should be seen as sort of the core reason for supporting everyone coding. But that's not the way that a lot of the message is. As Karen was saying, sometimes I think some of the messages around coding come out sort of narrowly, that it's just about workforce.
Or just about the tool. So I
Yes.
think, as we were preparing for this, one of the phrases or one of the keywords we were using a lot was this idea of technocentrism or technocentric thinking, which got in the time machine. And connecting earlier to the conversation about Seymour, this idea of a tool first rather than a thinking or learning first approach I think is a significant threat to the way in which Scratch gets out into the world. And yeah, so Scratch as a signifier isn't the authoring environment, it's really a way of thinking about learning and teaching.
Yeah. And of course, we care about technology. In the university I'm from, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, we see technology as very important. But I think I agree that this point that Seymour made, that he coined this term technocentrism, the idea that some people are just focused so much on the technology, they lose sight of other things. And I think I agree that really is a real threat if people think too narrowly. And we do see this happening, that it's a lot of this popular excitement around coding, sometimes it's as if all that's important is just learning to code. Just, if you can sort of make the computer do this, if you just learn how to control the computer, that is the end goal. And for us, it's not the end goal. And I think if people think just about the technology, they're going to lose the bigger message and the and the bigger opportunities that come around it. Although for us, it's always a balance that I think it's really important that we don't embrace that technocentric view of focusing that only coding is important. I think as a community, it's important for us to speak more broadly about the opportunities for creative expression and the ways that Scratch can support everybody becoming better designers and problem solvers and communicators. So it's important to have that broader message and not be too narrow. On the other hand, it is still true that the tools that you choose do make a difference. So it's not that we think that the technology is unimportant, that again, I also come from a place, the Media Lab, we think that the media that you choose are important. And we spend a lot of time thinking about the design of Scratch, and you spend a lot of time thinking about how to make use of Scratch. And each of those decisions are really important decisions. So it's not just anything goes. So we don't want to focus just on the technology, but the technologies we choose make a big difference.
Yeah, actually, that specific idea that tools matter a lot, but also that context matters a lot. And I think what I've loved about the Scratch conference, the past 3 Scratch conference, and I eagerly anticipate that for this, is the variety of context in which Scratch is used and how important that is and how diverse and different that looks in every setting. So I think sometimes when people who are new to Scratch encounter think, oh, it will take care of itself, or all uses are equal, and that's certainly not the case.
So, I think those are some of the ways in which we've been thinking about the strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats associated with it. It gave us a lens for thinking about some of the things that we want to keep in mind as we look ahead to the years ahead, the work that we're doing. But we want to make sure to open this up, and we'd love to hear from you. The reason for this conference is for all of us to be sharing ideas, and we look forward to, over the next few days, to be having conversations with all of you. And for the rest of the session, we want to open up to be able to do some more participation.
So people got notebooks?
Either blue or red.
And something to write with. So we noticed, Mitch got his yesterday, it was very exciting. So at the back of the notebook, there are actually perforated pages, not at the front, but at the back. This is very Moleskine standard. So we're gonna ask you, if you don't have yours yet, maybe your neighbor will be very kind and lend you a page, to pull out the page. I'm gonna do a little demo. Pull out a page and then choose one of these categories. So just somewhere on the page, write strength, weakness, opportunity, or threat. And as Mitch said, strengths and weaknesses are items that are more internal properties of Scratch, external properties not sort of internal, obviously. And then, so what is the category and what is sort of the thing that this made you think of that maybe we didn't cover? So we're going to give you about 5 minutes to work on this with your neighbor. This isn't a silent response type interaction. And then we're going to collect them after 5 minutes, and that's going to fuel the conversation to the end of the session.
Yeah, but feel free to talk to your neighbors about it. So this is not a closed book test. You're allowed to communicate. So, and should it pass in or out?
We'll deal with that in
Okay.
a couple minutes.
lights turn on. Okay. So I always hate breaking up animated conversation, but maybe if people could pass the notes to the center, Karen and I will come pick them up, and then we'll try to use those as a way of continuing the conversation. So I pass them in towards the center.
Do you actually want to sort them, or
Well,
shall I just ask you? I can. It's not going to be very systematic, but okay. Why don't I ask when you respond?
Fine. I was throwing out some that don't seem relevant. Maybe there's a lot of mobile things. Just give you some.
Yeah. Okay, I've got a question. Oh.
But here's something. Okay, there's other stuff. Also, we get.
Okay. Yeah.
So you'll.
Do you want to explain how we're going to run this?
Yes. So, Karen has very quickly read all 200 of the suggestions that came in. And she carefully did a full analysis to pull out the ones that were the best ones for us to have conversations around. So I give her the most challenging job. So she's going to try to filter through and pull out a few of these. And again, we apologize because I'm joking about it, but we know it's a challenge. We appreciate all of the great suggestions. We'll look at them all later. We'll try to pull a few of them out now to start some conversation. So Karen will pull out a few and maybe pose them, and I'll give some of my thoughts. She can share some of her thoughts, and we'll go from there.
You know I'm going to give you the toughest ones now with that introduction. Okay.
I knew I should have done this the other way around.
Okay, so first thought is a threat. Yeah. So young people's interests are continually changing. How do you keep up with that?
Yeah. Well, I do think that, I think that's a really good one to respond to. And I guess when I think back historically, a lot of times things that are very successful in the world in general and the education world in particular, a lot of times have success for a while and then die away. And a lot of times it's because they don't change with the times. And in fact, I do think that was one of the things that happened with Logo, that was such an inspiration for Scratch, but in some ways, drawing simple, graphical figures on the screen in the early 1980s was seen as really empowering. By 10 years later, it felt behind the times. So trying to make sure to keep up with both new technologies, new interests, I think is really important. At least one way that I know locally we try to deal with it is, I feel very fortunate to be at a university where we have a flow of creative young people coming in every year. Because to be honest, I know that I don't keep up with the times as well with all of the different, both technological trends, cultural trends. So staying in contact locally within our own group of just having new people coming in, bringing fresh ideas, and staying in touch with the community of the things people are thinking about and doing is the answer. But I think it's a great point that is a threat, and so it's really important to be constantly being aware of the changing interests, needs, and possibilities. Anything you would add to that?
I'm reading.
Oh, okay.
That sounded great.
Okay.
Are you ready for this?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm focused on the weaknesses. I'm not sure. Obviously, Scratch 2.0 transition to a more immersive online experience. Are we prepared for the internet?
Are we prepared?
So, are we ready to? Is the community are learners ready to have this predominantly online experience?
Oh, is the community, not I say.
Anyone involved? Are we ready for this transition?
Well, but at first I thought, are we involved on do we have enough servers to deal with it? Which is an important issue, because actually it's been a big challenge, and the development team, has put in a huge amount of work, because it was a much bigger challenge in the earlier version of Scratch. So I was taking it more internally about, are we ready? And I think we're pretty ready, although there's still challenges, like the moderation side. One thing that is still coming, some of you know that we have a new feature called Cloud Data that Shai Mindu has worked on, but it opens up new types of moderation challenges, because it's easy for people to create their own chat rooms in Scratch. So once you open up things online, it can open up new types of possibilities, which is great, but sometimes new possibilities that are more of a challenge for moderation and for supporting the type of community we want to support. So there are new challenges that keep on coming up. I guess, are we ready from the outside? There's part of a question of, are people ready technologically? Because I know one thing we want to be very aware of is that there's certain places that don't have the connectivity that is needed to do a really good online, to support the online version of Scratch. It's one of the reasons we are putting a high priority this summer, and we'll have a standalone version out by the end of the summer. So there's the technical point of making sure we have the technical infrastructure in place, such as our servers are ready and we have standalone versions. But maybe even more important, are we culturally ready for all the explosion of opportunities? We want to have more things where we integrate Scratch with other social media to make it easier over time to have Scratch programs, and from the Scratch website to be able to post things to Facebook, or Scratch projects to pull in information from Facebook, to be able to have a Scratch project that's always showing the latest post on your Facebook wall. These are things that are now opened up as possibilities with online versions, but it also opens up lots of questions of how to support that as a community and what directions it will go as a community. So I think we're ready to start exploring and continue to explore, but it's something that I think collectively all of us together is something that we'll have to be exploring together in the years to come.
Okay, you ready for the next?
Yes.
Okay, so this is I've now created multiple piles of things. So something that is seen as a strength, but also as a weakness. So I'm trying to balance out the weaknesses now. You're learning these foundational computational concepts, which enable you, in theory, to move on to other programming languages. How do you think about Scratch in relation to other languages and advanced features? So I have this cluster of people asking questions about Lambda and Snap. And I thought I'd bring this up because I think it's an interesting question, and it's one I get a lot. How do you think about Scratch in relation to other languages, and how do you make that transition?
Yeah, and it's something that we talk about a lot just within the design team and with the educators that we work with and we work with on Scratch Ed. I know it's also a big topic there. And on the Scratch website, in the forums, there's all types of discussions, both in terms of where to go next, because kids who have done a lot of great stuff with Scratch, but want to have some new experiences and saying, what should we do next? And part of the answer there is there's no one answer, is that there are lots of different pathways based on what your interests are and what you want to do. And that's one thing that there's a lot of discussion around. And and we're trying to find ways of helping people understand the different pathways beyond. One of them mentions, and also ongoing discussion around SNAP, which is made of, Brian Harvey and Jens and others have put together sort of a great mod of Scratch, or an extension that sort of takes the things with Scratch but adds lots of new features. We've had lots of discussions over the years of what's appropriate to add to Scratch itself, and in what ways is it better to support alternatives to Scratch like Snap that emerge. I think in our discussions, there's always trying to find the balance. We want to make sure that the Scratch community feels welcoming to a very broad range of people, and we sometimes worry if we put in certain types of new features or that it could end up being intimidating or off-putting to some members of the community. On the other hand, we want to provide a path for people to continue to go up and to do more and more complex things. So it's always, there's no right or wrong, there's no clear dividing line. We're always seeing how we can extend it through new features like cloud data and persistent data, but other things we don't put as high a priority on. So it's an ongoing discussion. I think it's great that there's other avenues out there like Snap for people who want to do more advanced computers. In particular, I think of Scratch, and we could talk to Brian more and later. I think especially of opening up to some more advanced computer science features. So people who really want to see Scratch as an entry point towards studying computer science. Scratch is missing some features as you want to continue to study computer science. And Snap provides a great avenue to go if one wants to dive more deeply into computer science concepts. And so I see that there's various pathways, and I think it's a balancing act. We do want to continue to add features to Scratch, but I think we've heard from some of you, some people think we're a little too conservative with adding features, and maybe guilty as charged, but I think we want to put a high priority. We always put a high priority, again, maybe too much so, of make sure that it stays welcoming to the beginners and to a broad audience. It's something that we put a high priority on, but then want to make sure that there's good pathways to continue beyond Scratch. And this will be an ongoing discussion that I think is really healthy for the extended community.
We probably have time for one more.
Okay.
Does that work? And I feel so bad because these are great.
Yeah.
I feel really.
But hopefully this could be a foundation. Hopefully, it was partly for us to have a discussion now, but hopefully this also planted seeds for smaller conversations you can have throughout the rest of the conference or in other conference sessions as well. And we'll continue to look at these. There'll also be a continuing conversation in our minds and in our group as we think about. So it's great to get all these inputs.
Yeah, and what I'll do is I'll scan these and I'll post them on Scratch Ed. So if people want to take a look at these and peruse the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that were raised here, I think they're really interesting and should not just be viewed by me. Yeah. So.
See, this is also why it's great when I said to always have new people think about things. So I was going to say, well, we could tape these up somewhere so people could see them, which might also be useful. Yeah. But the idea of also scanning them, having online is a very good idea.
Okay. Last one. So in the session, in the opening remarks, you talked about Scratch as being more than a tool, that it represents an approach to learning. And so there's a lot of possibility and potential there. And I saw a bunch of posts about how do you help people imagine the potential? And how do you get people, even if they've started to imagine the potential, how do you get them beyond their comfort zone? And this is both, people were talking about this with kids, getting kids beyond their comfort zone, but also getting educators beyond their comfort zone.
Yeah, but I think that's a great question. I remember a conversation I think we were having not too long ago, and one phrase we were talking about was being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that's hard. And I think all of us struggle with it. So I do think part of it is, and it's a different way of thinking of yourself as a learner. So I think, and so this is not an easy answer. I don't think there's a quick fix to this, but I think ultimately, if we want to help people develop as good learners, do we have to help people learn to be willing to experiment, take risks, try new things, and all that involves being somewhat uncomfortable. So I think rather than the answer being, oh, we just have to improve the language or improve the activities so that everyone's comfortable with it. And of course, we should remove needlessly uncomfortable things. If there's some extraneous syntax in the language or something that's confusing about some support materials, that of course we should eliminate. But I think we have to recognize that part of learning is being willing to be a little bit uncomfortable and to do it. And there's not an easy answer to that, but it's something that we have to, as part of the discussions that go on in Scratch Ed and in workshops and in introducing to Scratch, whether it's at home or in a community center in a school, both for educators and with kids, that should be part of the discussion of thinking of being willing to experiment, try things that are unfamiliar to you, and in fact make you feel uncomfortable, and to be willing to recognize that that's part of the learning process. I think it's also something that comes to mind as we think about the online community. If we want people to take risks and to do things they're uncomfortable with, it means that some things aren't going to work very well. They're going to do some things where they're not very successful. And if they do some things, they're not successful, and someone at the workshop or someone online says, that's no good, my 3-year-old brother could have done that, that's going to make you not take many risks in the future. So I think one thing that's so important to us about the community, and sometimes we don't emphasize this enough, and like when we talked about the community earlier, we talked about all the importance of learning, the different programming approaches from what you see others doing and having an audience for what you create. But I think one thing that's so important is to have a supportive community that supports you in your learning. And part of a supportive community is people who recognize that the importance of taking risks and support you when things go wrong rather than criticize you when things go wrong.
That's actually the one that I wanted to end on was a strength, and it says, with Scratch, you're not alone, you're part of a community, keep on scratching. And I thought that was a nice connection to what you said.
So, but again, I think these were great observations, and we'll take a closer look, we'll scan them, put them online. Maybe to sort of wrap up, for us, we also want to make this session, for us, a way of starting to think about it is that we'll continue to think about through the rest of the conference and through the next few years. So it's great to have this opportunity to get together with all of you at the conference. And for us, the conference is an opportunity, even though it's called the Scratch Conference, for us, it really is about much more than Scratch. I think this gets back to some of the things we talked about as we were doing our thinking through and reflecting on Scratch, that Scratch in some ways is a key word that is hopefully opens up to a broader set of ideas. I know when I think about it, and think about how should we move forward with Scratch, at this conference in the years ahead, for me, I can't decouple that from thinking about what are the most important goals for supporting learners in the future. And before thinking about what we should do with Scratch, I think we need some clarity about what we think are the most important things to help young people prepare for their lives ahead in a rapidly changing world. So for me, I usually think about in terms of the importance of helping people develop as creative thinkers. That is, the world is changing so quickly that we know in the future people will be confronted with unexpected and uncertain situations. So it's so important for people to be creative thinkers. So for me, the top goal is how do we help people develop as creative thinkers? I know you think about this in somewhat related ways.
Yeah, the word that I often think of is less about creative thinking and more about learner agency. So to what extent are learners able to define and pursue problems that they care about and are passionate about? And I think there's a lot of overlap in how we think about the ways in which operating as a creative thinker or operating as a learner with agency supports you well into the future.
Yeah, so I think as we have conversations at the conference and into the future, one thing that's always in the back of our mind is, how can we have this clear vision of what we think is important for the future of learning? And then how can we take those goals and help support them through the directions we go with Scratch? And I think it's true both for as we develop new versions of Scratch and new activity and new technologies, but just as important when every educator around the world is thinking of how to put Scratch into action, they need to be thinking those same things. And we look forward to these discussions over the next few days.
I'm taking over because we're running out of time. Thank you, Mitch. Thank you, Karen. With all your ambitions, I think you came to the right place. The 200 people here in this room, they share a lot of your things. When I opened the conference, I prepared a speech and I forgot a lot of things to put in. I take the opportunity for 3 more things. The good thing is you brought down the network. So now we have 2 wireless networks, Scratch 2013 BCN and Scratch 2013 BCN 2, I think. Otherwise, you should look for a better name. When we started way back in November, I went to MOSFest, where a large part of the Media Lab team was present, and I talked with Mitch, and Mitch asked us explicitly to do it different than MIT. Up till now, it wasn't that different. We opened with a keynote of Karen and Mitch, but I guarantee you the rest will be very different. The other 4 keynote speakers are handpicked, no professional relationships with MIT, by European selectors. We focus also strongly on the hardware side, the tinkering, the try and play with your hands, the sandbox. Tomorrow we'll have 2 incredibly European initiatives on stage here. And also Friday, the educational side has some very special speakers. And in between, lots will happen. Another thing we do different from the conference at MIT, we have hosts at every session. So I'm kind of hosting this session, and the other 45 are hosted by different people. I asked for volunteers. We still need volunteers. If you want to host one session, you know, take the mic and start and end the thing. Drop us a line. And the trouble is we forgot to inform the hosts of today. So during the next coffee break, I will look for some people, especially Boris and Frank. Thank you. Have a nice conference.